Welcome to the Far Out. In this segment, we're going to talk about all things that one day will help India qualify for the FIFA World Cup. But let's first take a step back and look at the big picture, shall we? Every episode we'll talk about one element that we believe that India needs to focus on if it really wants to play in the Football World Cup. Each element as important as the other. Imagine them as one of the cogs of the wheel that will take India over the line. For today's episode, we are going to cover our fourth element, which is building a football ecosystem. No surprises there as it is already given in the video title. Now, what do we mean by a football ecosystem? To put it in the simplest term, it is to have an environment which is conducive to the growth of football. By conducive, we don't mean where it thrives, but where it flourishes. And needless to say, domestic football is a big part of it. And rather than having a monologue of my own, I thought it would be great if I asked one of my friends to shed some light on this subject. So we got one of them today in the form of Viv, who is back with us once again. Hey Viv, welcome back to the channel. Thank you once again for taking some time off to do this.
Hey Nice, it's nice to be back on. So what's the topic this time then?
So my question to you today is, can you explain to me and those who are watching what are the different elements of domestic football that helps it to sustain irrespective of the country?
Well, there are so many different layers that make football what it is today. To answer your question, the modern European football ecosystem is comprised of a multitude of many independent stakeholders with diverging worldviews, different clubs, governing bodies, competition organizers, owners, players, sponsors, and supporters all have an overlapping interests, and in many cases they can be perceived to be the speaker or the PR representative for the same organization. Generally though, the juggernaut that is European football keeps functioning quite simply because of the popularity of the sport and the strength that is its fan base. The money that it brings in, of course, and how it's distributed. The culture of European football is super important. And finally, well-established governing bodies across all different levels, whether it be UEFA at the very top, or the national governing bodies such as the FA in England, or the regional sporting councils and their funding. Association football is the most popular sport in almost all countries in Europe. European leagues alone comprise of 36 leagues and more than 1,000 clubs. That's a lot of football players, staff, fans, and all the businesses involved with them too. As I mentioned just now, also money is a massive factor in keeping the sport growing, at least here in Europe. From the crazy wages to the sponsorships to the diehard ultras, the whole ecosystem continues to grow thanks to the money being pumped into its development. National bodies will try their best to filter money way down into the academies and grassroots levels, as well as allowing it to continue to develop and push through new talent. Keep in mind also that European national teams have won 12 out of the last 21 editions of the FIFA World Cup. The European Champions League final, for example, as well, is comparable to the NFL Super Bowl or the NBA Finals. Football is a cultural institution with over 100 years of history, and time is behind its side and has set up relationships between all these different stakeholders that exist now. Even during the COVID crisis, we still had matches going on, albeit without fans, due to its extremely important place in European society.
That's an interesting insight indeed, but I have a follow-up question. What part can the state or government play in all of this? Or more precisely, how it can fast track all of this?
As I briefly mentioned in the previous question, the local football associations are vitally important to the development of football in that country, which allows them to create a strong grassroots scene and a long-term goal to creating great players that can bring their country to the highest results possible. Funding from the state and allocating those funds strategically is critical, as you simply cannot compete on a world stage without all of this. Building up the correct infrastructure for local clubs to compete and allowing children to develop into top players is also vitally critical. And generally speaking, football is improving in quality across all different levels. I mean, you don't have to look any further than the women's game to see how its viewership has exploded. thanks to increased funding from big traditionally male-dominated clubs and the local national associations. And finally, the national bodies have put in place the infrastructure, or are putting in place infrastructure, or provide subsidies to help build football up, and put in, for example, practice pitches to allow easy access to entry, or to give more facilities for the youth to develop. It's hard to say that there's one sure fast-track route to creating a sustainable ecosystem to growing the sport of football in a given region, but keep in mind that kids are going through academies, and they take years to become the next best thing. I mean, people like Messi and Mbappe went through their respective academies for years before becoming the players that they are today, and the process can take a long time, and is heavily dependent on all those different things which are in those academies, or in those national bodies, or in those infrastructures. And improving all those different aspects can help improve the entire ecosystem for a country and their football, and their development of football, and their level of football as well.
Thank you so much again for this, Viv. I will always come back to you to get insights in the future.
You're more than welcome, Nice. Thank you for having me on, and I look forward to talking with you on another topic soon. Take care.
Again, we are just scratching the surface here. There's so much to talk about this. We will definitely revisit this topic in the future too. Now, we are going to move on to our next segment, in which we talk about the Origin episode takeaway. Previously on the channel, we covered the origins of football in Germany. Do check out that video over here. So, what should India learn from Germany? What was maybe one takeaway from exploring their origins? Again, what we might talk about would not be only specific to Germany. We might observe the same fact in some other footballing nation, and vice versa. But for the sake of these series of videos, we are going to consider the following as the only takeaway from Germany. And our takeaway is a longer domestic football calendar. Let me expand on that to make it more comprehensible. First, let's have a look at how long the Indian domestic season lasts as compared to that of the Bundesliga. We have added the seasons of both the Indian Super League and the I-League on the graphic. 4 months for India as opposed to 9 for Germany. And as you can see, the difference is quite evident. Now, if we were to add the 4 remaining top European leagues as well as the Major League Soccer season for good measure, still we observe there's a stark contrast. But you know what, we are comparing apples to oranges here. How about we compare domestic seasons of countries who are in the Asian Confederation? Still we observe that the Indian domestic season, which only lasts for 4 months, is nowhere near to the 9 of most of the countries shown here. Their domestic season lasts more than twice as compared to that of India's. Needless to say, that's just not going to cut it. If Indian football has to take giant strides in the future towards a possible World Cup berth, it seriously has to consider a longer domestic season. 4 months annually are too short to make any kind of difference. A longer domestic season translates to more on-field experience for our footballers. Given the overseas talent that is available in the Indian Super League and the I-League, playing alongside them for a better part of a year will only improve the existing skills of our Indian players, which will help India to excel at the international level. Having said that, as more teams or franchises get added in future seasons of the Indian Super League, we will probably solve this issue. However, as things stand, the status quo will prove detrimental to India's World Cup dreams. Now we'll briefly give you some statistics about football in Germany, which we didn't speak about in the Origin series. Germany is a member of FIFA since 1904. It was one of its founding members. Today, it has over 26,000 registered clubs spread across the country. Germany has over 6.6 million registered licensed players, that is 8% of its total population, which plays football in some capacity, that is amateur, semi-professional or professional. Now, if we were to have the same proportion of people playing football in India, we will need a total of 112 million, that is 11 crores. So here are our 4 takeaways from 4 Football Origins episodes so far. Plenty more to follow. Now we move on to the next segment, which is India's football history. We had made a separate video of our football history between the period of 1947 and 1954, including the time we qualified for the Football World Cup. You can check out the video over here. As for this episode, we are going to cover the exploits of the Indian football team between the period of 1971 and 1978. As we saw previously, 1962 is approximately when what is known as the golden era of Indian football ended. As for this period in question, the Indian team doesn't have anything to show. If we were to talk about the two Asian Games during these 8 years, in the 1974 edition in Iran, India's performance sharply declined as they finished last in their group, losing all 3 matches, scoring 2 and conceding 14 goals in the first round. The host Iran went on to win the gold medal. India then showed steady performance during the 1978 Asian Games in Bangkok, finishing second in their group of 3. The team was then knocked out in the next round, finishing last in their group with 3 defeats from 3 matches. The gold medal was eventually shared between North and South Korea. In the Asian qualifiers for the World Cup in Germany in 1974, India did not even enter the qualifying round. In fact, they did not enter the qualification round of a World Cup for another 12 years. There was only one spot up for grabs between the Asian and Oceania confederations, and it was Australia, the team from Oceania, that qualified for that edition, which was their first appearance in the World Cup, which meant no team from Asia qualified for that edition. In the Asian qualifiers for the World Cup in Argentina in 1978, again India did not even enter the qualifying round. And again, there was only one spot up for grabs between the Asian and Oceania confederations. And this time it was Iran, the team that qualified for that edition, which was their first appearance in the World Cup too. So that wraps up this segment 2. Let us know in the comments below of what you thought of this episode of taking India to the World Cup. What you believe about how essential it is for India to build a football ecosystem, about our takeaway from the Germany episode, and if there's anything that we missed about Indian football's exploits between the period of 1971 and 1978. We are going to talk about our football history of other nations, do some introspection along the way as a footballing nation, and most importantly, ask ourselves what India can do to get our time in the sun at the biggest sporting event of them all.